Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, on the ground. For the second time in less than a week, President Biden is set to visit Americans affected by Ida's wrath, with the Northeast on his itinerary today. This, as nearly 500,000 remain without power in Louisiana. We'll bring you the latest on recovery efforts from New Orleans to New York City. Back to school testing this morning, the push to keep students COVID-free in one of America's largest public school districts will bring you an inside look at Detroit's ambitious new citywide testing program as kids head back to the classroom. Spotlight Texas. Lone Star State Governor Greg Abbott set to sign into law that controversial and restrictive voting rights bill today after a lengthy battle with state Democrats. This as the Biden Justice Department vows to support and protect women in Texas seeking abortions. How the Attorney General is reacting to that headline-grabbing ban this morning. And an invisible epidemic. This morning, NBC News investigates wage theft in America. Companies profiting off of the work of some of their lowest paid workers. We'll take you a closer look at how it happens and how, in one case, workers put a stop to it. And Joe is with us this morning,
yes.
Fresh off your Broadway special.
Yes, and a 3-day weekend to recharge.
Which you very much deserved, and your special was wonderful. We're so happy to have you here, though. We begin this morning with President Biden's trip to the Northeast to tour the devastation brought by Ida.
The president approved a major disaster declaration in New York and New Jersey, which clears the way for federal aid to hard-hit areas. At least 50 people across the Northeast were killed by the storm. NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber is on the ground in Manville, New Jersey. That is President Biden's first stop today. So, Ellison, set the scene. What is it like for residents there right now?
It's rubble as far as the eye can see. When the sun starts to come up, people come out starting to pick up what they've been doing the last couple of days, trying to clean up, go through what is left of their home, their memories, their Christmas lights, children's toys. And for many people, they are then trying to figure out how and if they will rebuild and where they will go in the meantime. Listen to what one resident told us.
It's very stressful, very, very stressful, because now you got to think, where am I going to come up with the money to try to repair it? Because insurance companies, they don't like to pay out. They'll say it's an act of God, you know, or something. They'll come up with an excuse. And now you're fighting with the insurance company for months on months while your house is sitting there and you have no place to live. Because if you don't have family here, where do you go?
And of course, this storm, it didn't just destroy people's physical items, memories. It took a lot of lives as well. In New Jersey alone, at least 27 people have died because of this storm. And Joe, 4 people are still missing.
So, Ellison, just on Friday, President Biden was on the ground in Louisiana looking at the storm damage there. What will we see during the president's visit there today?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe this will be the second time he has gone to visit a major disaster area because of Hurricane Ida in less than a week. He is going to start here in Manville, New Jersey. We expect him to talk about infrastructure and the need for Congress to act in regards to infrastructure, much like he did in Louisiana. He'll begin his day here, and then he'll head to New York, to Queens, New York, where he'll visit hard-hit neighborhoods there, as well as meet with local leaders.
And Ellison, as we just heard, there's concerns about insurance. In the meantime, FEMA approved a major disaster declaration for 6 counties hit hard by the storm. What kind of relief does that provide for residents, especially right away?
So it's financial aid primarily. It can, among other things, it can cover loans for temporary housing as well as home repairs. It really does touch on a host of things, but the big issue there is it is financial relief. And as you said, right now, it only covers 6 counties. The governor of this state says that they are in talks with FEMA. They are working with FEMA to try to get additional counties added to that. They're also telling people that they can go ahead and go to FEMA assistance, disasterassistance.gov to apply for that FEMA aid. If you're living in those 6 counties, for people outside of those counties, the governor is asking everyone to go to nj.gov gov/Ida to go ahead and register if they have been impacted by this storm so that they can try and get people aid as quickly as possible, particularly if that declaration expands beyond those 6 counties, as local officials hope it will.
All right,
Joe.
Ellison Barber reporting from a community that offers just a sample of the destruction throughout the area. Ellison, thank you.
As the Northeast reels from historic flooding, hundreds of thousands in Louisiana are still without power from the storm, which made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane. NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman joins us now from Metairie, Louisiana. Josh, good morning. So first, just tell us, what's the situation like there where you are in Louisiana?
Day by day, Savannah, the power is slowly creeping back, with the largest utility here in Louisiana saying they've now got 51% of their customers who had lost power back online. And you can start to see some of the recovery effort shifting into a new stage. As of today, in several of the parishes in the area, they're going to start debris collection. So basically everybody who has had stuff in their homes damaged, pieces of their homes falling off, have basically put it not in the street, but right at the end of their yards, lining the street. And now trucks are going to start to come by and remove, essentially the debris of people's lives and allow them to start moving on there. You're also starting to see more folks try to cover up patched areas with these blue tarps, kind of like this one you can see behind me here. We were here just a couple days ago, and this massive hole in this shopping center was totally exposed. Now they've put that blue tarp over it. And in fact, that'll be an option for homeowners as well. It's the Blue Roof program you might have remembered from Katrina and other disasters. And it's actually run by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They will be offering that free service to folks here in Louisiana.
And Josh, schools in Jefferson Parish are closed for the rest of the week. I mean, when do we think schools are going to reopen? What impact is this having on students and their families?
School is closed until further notice, at least the end of this week. And in fact, schools around here, most of them had started back last month. And so this is actually a break several weeks into the school year. And that's creating new challenges, obviously, for parents, because as the power is coming back, more and more people are expected to go back to work. But of course, they now have to face childcare issues as well, Savannah.
And Josh, one of these other heartbreaking things that we're hearing about are fatalities at nursing homes. State health officials announced they evacuated residents from 8 senior living facilities because of these unsafe conditions after the storm, and finding several people who did not make it. What are city officials saying now about that?
Well, city officials say that they discovered these deaths and this situation as they were doing wellness checks on what are essentially independent apartments for seniors with some assistance there. They deemed those conditions unsafe, and this came after they also had more than 800 people from nursing homes here in the area who, during Ida, were brought to essentially a warehouse that turned out to be in the hardest hit area, or one of the hardest hit areas. They were living in squalor, several deaths, and officials had to find other places for them to go. And, you know, Savannah, you expect in any hurricane there's going to be some destruction, possibly even death, but this is just totally avoidable.
Absolutely. And I'm sure there are a lot of questions that family members want answered. Josh Letterman, thank you so much for your reporting.
It's the start of the new school year, and concern is growing that in-person classes could lead to a surge in COVID cases among students. In Detroit, they've launched an ambitious COVID safety program aimed at preventing just that. Among the guidelines, they're aiming to conduct weekly COVID testing on all 40,000 students, as well as faculty and staff. Plus, they're making masks mandatory, and they overhaul the ventilation systems in schools. NBC News correspondent Heidi Prisbilla is outside Priest Elementary School in Detroit with all the details. So, Heidi, today's the first day of school in Detroit. How does this ambitious COVID safety program work? What are folks saying about it?
Yeah, Joe, this is one of the most chronically underfunded, underserved districts in the entire country. And yet they are trying to pull off a very ambitious program here. It started last week, bringing both students and staff back into these buildings where they will have actual testing clinics set up in the buildings. They will have designated times for both student and staff once a week. When they come into the building, take their test within 24 to 48 hours, they will have the results. And school officials here think this will make a huge difference in taking out those students and staff who may be showing positive before they infect the rest of their class, the rest of the school. Here's what school officials had to say.
oftentimes Detroit Public Schools Community District is, from our perspective, particularly in the context of Detroit, where only about 40% of our city's population is vaccinated, we see this as really a no other option.
And as we know, Joe, you can be asymptomatic and spread this to the entire class before people even know it or show any symptoms. So the question really is not why is Detroit doing this? It's why aren't so many other districts doing this, Joe? We've talked with members of Congress. They said we gave $10 billion for schools across the country to be doing testing programs like this. The CDC says they should be doing testing programs like this. So Detroit proving itself that against the odds, it can be a leader in this area.
Yeah, and as you point out, Detroit's doing this even though it faces a number of challenges, including financial ones. What are the biggest issues facing Detroit schools, and how does the district plan to solve some of those issues while still balancing all these COVID concerns?
Right, they've long had inequitable funding here, Joe, and the results of that with COVID were really devastating. About 30% of kids not even coming to class. And that's why they say they really cannot afford to have a repeat of that. They need to keep children in these buildings. And that is why they are doing this. They have some ideas because the answer is that they really don't know how many of those kids are actually coming back, whether overcrowding is going to be an issue again. So here are their ideas.
We will be providing the teacher with more pay based on having more students above that limit. If teachers are uncomfortable with the number in their classroom, then we'll create another section or hire another teacher, or another teacher is ready to be hired and brought to the school to reduce class size. We're not anticipating that being a challenge because we also have to look at not only roster, but the actual number of students that attend and attend regularly. So all of that will be balanced.
Again, Joe, in a district with so much stacked against it, if Detroit can do this, public health officials asking why can't we be doing it everywhere?
And Heidi, I mean, keeping kids safe in school has become a hot button issue, at least some of the ways that people want to try and keep kids safe. So we've seen battles over mask mandates and testing. I know you spoke with a congresswoman from Washington who's been very outspoken on this issue. What did she tell you?
She said that there needs to be all of these mitigation measures, but that it's frustrating that we're not seeing more of it, that it's frustrating that we're seeing so many parents fight some of these pretty basic safety protocols. Here's what she said.
I think right now schools, a lot of them are in just this quagmire of a discussion or of a fight about whether to even have children wear masks. And that is ridiculous. That should be settled science, and it is highly irresponsible to not have every child and every staff member in a mask when they're indoors. Every concerned parent should be calling their school, and I apologize to the principals out there, but this is what needs to happen, is that the public needs to put pressure on schools to have surveillance testing either in the classroom or send the tests home with the kids and have them do it at home so they don't even come to school if it's positive, right? You can do this in many different ways.
So even if public health officials and schools heed that advice, Joe, the question is how quickly can they stand up these programs? Detroit started working on this back in the spring, and now you have, after this Labor Day holiday, by the end of this month, 55 million children heading back into public school classrooms. They're doing all kinds of things like putting them in together for communal lunch. And public health officials say that could create mini incubators for COVID.
All right, Heidi Presbella reporting from the first day of school in Detroit. Heidi, thank you.
Let's bring in Dr. Amish Adaja for more on the latest COVID news, a senior scholar at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. Dr. Adaja, good morning. Always great to have you. I want to ask you about what Joe was just discussing with Heidi there, the return to school in just a moment. But first, I want to start with this new variant recently that the World Health Organization has been monitoring and that's now reported in 49 states. Health officials in Los Angeles have even confirmed at least 167 people have it. Give us the context for these numbers, and how concerned should we be by this news, by hearing about another variant?
So what you're referencing is what's called the mu variant, which is a variant that was discovered in South America and is now spread to 49 or so states. This is still a very, very small proportion of the cases in the United States. One of the silver or bad linings of the Delta variant is that it's so fit a version of the virus that it makes it very hard for any other variant to take hold. It's important to watch this mu variant. There is some data from laboratory studies showing maybe it is more transmissible than other versions of this virus, and maybe it will pose a problem for monoclonal antibodies and vaccines. But I just caution when you see those kind of headlines, because what we want is clinical data, not laboratory data, because we know that the vaccines hold up when it comes to serious disease, hospitalization, and death, even against the most problematic variant. So I would say nothing to worry about too much right now, but it's something that authorities need to track and keep abreast of.
All right, good. So some peace of mind there for now, at least. Now let's get back to school. I mean, we have some concerning new data from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Nearly a fifth of new reported cases are among children. What does this tell us about the spread of COVID among those who are so young, who can't be vaccinated? And what should parents be doing as the school year gets underway and we head into flu season?
So the Delta variant is going to find people when they're unvaccinated. It doesn't care about their age. And it just so happens that children under the age of 12 are ineligible to be vaccinated, and those between 12 and 17 have low vaccination rates. And children, because they're generally spared from severe disease, are back to most of their activity. So that's why these Delta variant cases are occurring in children. That's why we're seeing this uptick in kids. What's important is to remember, again, that this is not usually a severe disease for most children. There are some vulnerable children where parents need to take cautions if they've got a transplant or asthma, for example. But what we have to do is really be aggressive in schools with testing, with having appropriate quarantine measures, and really using masks in a way that's necessary when there's high community spread.
Let's talk about another subset of back to school that is qualified for the vaccine. College this weekend kicked off the start of college football season along with back to school. I mean, we've seen these games where thousands of students, look at these pictures, are packed into stadiums to cheer on their school with no masks, no social distancing. And many of these schools, though some do, but many don't have a vaccination or mask protocol in place. Are you concerned that games like this and the return events like this on college campuses will become super spreader events?
It's certain that when you have high levels of social interaction without social distancing, that you're going to see some transmission. Usually in outdoor settings, it's lower, but in this situation where people are that close together, I think that the outdoors doesn't provide a complete guarantee against transmission. So this is going to be an issue for colleges to be aggressive with testing, to make sure that they have as many students vaccinated as possible, and to really stay ahead of these types of events so that they don't disrupt the operations of the university.
All right, Dr. Amish Adaja, always great to have you. Thank you so much for your expertise here. Today, Texas Governor Greg Abbott is expected to sign that controversial election bill, SB 1.
This comes after a months-long battle to get this legislation through the state house, which saw the state's Democratic representatives fly to Washington during a special session to stonewall the bill's passage. Then, when the same bill started moving through a second special legislative session, State Senator Carol Alvarado strapped on her sneakers and filibustered overnight for 15 hours.
And of course, this all comes as another controversial Texas law draws national attention. That recent legislation that bans a majority of abortions. Attorney General Merrick Garland said Monday that the Justice Department would, quote, protect those seeking to obtain or provide reproductive health services under a federal law. Joining us to break down the state laws making national news, senior reporter for NBCNews.com, Jane Tim, and NBC News Justice correspondent Julia Ainsley.
So, Jane, let's start with you and the election bill. Back in July, you're the one who first broke the news that the Texas state reps and senators were getting on planes to throw a wrench in the process. They delayed it, but in the end, it was the inevitable. It's finally getting signed into law today, barring any major interruption. So, set the stage. How did this all happen?
Yeah, Joe, this was the politically inevitable, and it's why Democrats went to such enormous lengths to try and delay it, to try and buy themselves some time. They said they were buying time for democracy and hoping that Congress would act. They knew there was legislation that could make a huge impact and essentially kneecap a lot of the restrictions in these laws, and they really thought that they could push the needle, they could move the needle. But the Democrats in Texas are a minority party, and Republicans knew that they had the upper hand in terms of votes. And if they simply waited them out and essentially smoked them out of D.C., that they would eventually come home. And they didn't even have to arrest them and drag them back to the state legislature, as they'd always said they wanted to. They just waited. And eventually the political pressure of a surging pandemic brought the Democrats back to Austin on their own, and they were able to pass this law quite quickly and with a lot of the provisions they wanted. There wasn't a lot of negotiating power for Democrats after leaving for weeks.
Now, Julia, let's bring you in here and let's turn now to that abortion law. So, as I mentioned, U.S. Attorney General has vowed to protect abortion clinics in Texas. I said under a federal law. Well, what that is what's called the FACE Act, Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances. How would that work? What does citing that mean? And how much power does the Justice Department have here?
Well, the Justice Department is still exploring all of their legal options, including how they may try to push this in federal courts down in Texas, because this is not over. All that was ruled last week was that the Supreme Court was not going to issue an emergency stay on this bill. But the FACE Act is a small tool that the Justice Department has immediately available just to protect people who are entering an abortion clinic to go in for whatever procedure. It's supposed to physically protect people and property. That's what Merrick Garland is evoking here, and he brought this up in his statement just yesterday. But it's not enough to force abortion providers to be open. And as we heard last week from many of them, they were effectively closing most of their services because that abortion bill really stops any procedures from happening after 6 weeks of a pregnancy.
And Julia, anti-abortion rights groups are fired up after the Supreme Court's decision to allow this Texas law to take effect. But a judge in Texas has granted a restraining order temporarily preventing some lawsuits. What does that mean for the law? What's next?
That's right. So we're hearing from groups like Planned Parenthood that say that this still isn't enough, that they still need this law to be overturned. But this judge issued a very temporary and very restrictive restraining order, very small in scope, and that it just means that this one Texas anti-abortion group cannot file those lawsuits against Planned Parenthood in Texas. The lawsuits were really the bulk, the centerpiece of the entire law, because it allowed private citizens and private citizen groups to sue anyone in civil court who might be associated with an abortion that happened after 6 weeks. So this preliminary injunction for now keeps that from happening. But we'll see oral arguments on September 13th. So that's another piece of this to watch. But of course, we're still watching what happens at the district level and whether or not, when this case is finally decided in court and there are oral arguments, what kind of questions might come up, including how in the world can you enforce a law that is all built on civil lawsuits, not on any kind of law of the land being enforced. It's really something that could be copied not just for abortion, but across the country to promote any kind of political agenda. And so we'll see what happens next.
Yes, we certainly will. Before we let you go, Jane, I want to bring you back in here with a quick question back on that election bill. So it seems as though what's happening in Texas is pressuring Washington lawmakers to act. Remind us what the latest is with the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the For the People Act. Are those moving at all on Capitol Hill?
You know, they've both been passed by the House, but politically, the minority party in the Senate has a lot more power than the minority party back in Texas. So this bill, Republicans want to block it, and they've said they're going to. I don't really see anything moving. Democrats are desperate to pass it, desperate to pass something, any kind of version. I think they're going to try, but I don't see Republicans budging on this. I think they are very happy to send their voters to the midterm polls next year with some talk of election integrity and say, look, we fixed things, even if there is no evidence of widespread fraud.
Jane, Tim, and Julia Ainsley with All Things Texas for us this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, let's get a check on what we hope is a much quieter morning News Now weather forecast.
Yeah, Janessa Webb is with us today. Hey, Janessa.
Hi, good morning. Yeah, we can always hope, right? I mean, the sun glare across the Northeast has been amazing. Sunny skies. Please enjoy it today because things are headed for a change by tomorrow. That's not the case for our friends in Southeast Louisiana, still dealing with a cluster of storms that are going to make its way into that area this afternoon, and it lasts for about 2 to 3 days. And this is wet weather they definitely do not need. They're trying to clean up in that area, and it makes its way into the Florida Panhandle as well. Some of these rainfall rates, man, they're about 2 to 3 inches per hour at times, but hopefully today, after this cold front makes its way through that area, things will die down. The better news for Southeast Louisiana, we're going to see overnight lows. They'll drop to the lower 60s, so a little bit of relief from all those heat advisories we've been dealing with for the last couple of days. Now, also for the Midwest to the Great Lakes, we're going to watch severe weather for today. We have a good chunk of people, 16 million people at risk this afternoon into your evening from Detroit all the way into Indiana under a severe weather risk. The primary threat will be damaging wind gusts and a little bit of hail this afternoon. Now, this entire system, bad news here, makes its way north and east by tomorrow. And all the sunshine that you're going to enjoy today from Maine all the way down to Atlantic City, that turns into a good dose of rain. We could see rainfall rates up to 2 inches per hour. So today, guys, it's vital. Get outside.
All right. Yeah. Doctor's orders. Weather. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Yes.
Coming up, the secretaries of both state and defense are in the Middle East today.
Yeah, their mission of diplomacy as the Taliban bolsters its control over Afghanistan. That's after the break.
Two of the United States' top leaders are in the Middle East today. Their goal, ease diplomatic tensions with the region as the Taliban solidifies its hold over Afghanistan.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin met with their counterparts in Qatar today, holding a press conference together to bolster the relationship between the two countries. NBC News global correspondent Raf Sanchez has the story.
Joe, Savannah, for days now, the State Department has been pretty vague about what's going on with these charter planes that are trying to leave Mazar-e-Sharif Airport in northern Afghanistan. Today in Doha, Secretary of State Blinken finally giving some detail about what's going on there. He confirmed there was what he said was a relatively small number of Americans trying to get out on those planes. But he said the problem is those American citizens, along with some Afghans who have valid travel documents, are mixed in with other Afghans who do not have the right paperwork. And so right now, the Taliban is not allowing anyone to leave. The secretary also denied claims made over the weekend by Republican Representative Mike McCall that this was a hostage situation at Mazar-e-Sharif. Take a listen to what the secretary had to say.
We have been assured again that all American citizens and Afghan citizens with valid travel documents will be allowed to leave. They're not aware of anyone being held on an aircraft or any hostage-like situation in Mazar-e-Sharif.
Now, the details are still murky here, but this does appear to be what many people feared, that once U.S. troops left Afghanistan, American citizens who were left behind would basically be at the mercy of the Taliban as to whether they can leave or not. The Taliban say that they will let people with valid travel documents out. The secretary insists the U.S. will hold them accountable on that. Now, this morning, we are also seeing what appears to be the largest protests in Kabul since the city fell to the Taliban back on August 15th. Very large groups of both men and women out on the streets together protesting against the Taliban. Taliban gunmen have been firing in the air in an effort to try to disperse these crowds. No reports right now of any injuries. Joe, Savannah?
All right, thank you, Raf. Coming up, an observed communication breakdown between U.S. intelligence and law enforcement in the run-up to the September 11th attacks.
How the NYPD is working to ensure that vital information on potential threats never slips through their fingers again. That story next.
Welcome back. Cardi B is now a mother of two. The rapper broke the news on social media with a heartwarming picture of her holding the baby boy alongside her husband, Offset. In a statement to People magazine, Cardi B says, "We are so overjoyed to finally meet our son. He is already loved so much by family and friends, and we can't wait to introduce him to his other siblings." The couple were already parents to a 3-year-old daughter, Culture. But look at that, and what a sweet picture that you saw for a minute there.
Yeah. We'll just wait for it to cycle back around.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Thank you,
This will be in
Savannah.
a second. Yeah.
One of the biggest failures in the run-up to September 11th was poor communication within the intelligence community and law enforcement. That's according to the 9/11 Commission report. Now, NYPD detectives are taking steps to address mistakes of the past. NBC News investigations correspondent Tom Winter got exclusive access to an NYPD intelligence briefing. Joins us now with more. Tom, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. What we wanted to know is what's changed in the 20 years since 9/11, since that fateful day. Specifically, what has happened to address some of those concerns, as you suggested and raised from the 9/11 Commission report? What is being done to share information? What is the NYPD getting from abroad? And where are things going next in the threat environment? When it comes to terrorism, New York City's police department isn't afraid to publicly show force. But in the shadows, in places they don't allow cameras, the brains of the department work 24/7.
So I would imagine after these events that we're probably going to see a pickup.
This is the NYPD's Intelligence Bureau.
We decided that if we really want to do this right, we have to have a dedicated force that is specially trained.
The man in charge, a 37-year veteran NYPD cop from the beat, Chief Thomas Galati, determined to try to stop the next terror attack, building on the lessons from the past.
I think if you look at the 9/11 Commission report, the failure was the failure of sharing of intelligence. So, you don't want to be the person that's holding a piece of information and then something happens.
We were there the morning after a bomb ripped through a crowd in Kabul, Afghanistan. NBC News granted exclusive access to the day's intelligence briefing.
This is going to provide a situational update based on our initial assessment.
The NYPD's focus? Making sure no suspected terrorists are sneaking into the flood of Afghan evacuees.
They're being vetted by the DGSI, which is our equivalent of the FBI.
Right away, Galati spots a potential problem.
There's been some reporting from the UK that some of the people there were actually no-flied.
Yeah, or on some other kind of watch list.
The lesson of 9/11, Galati says, identify the threat overseas before it comes home to New York City. How? 15 NYPD posts across the globe. So essentially, the sun never sets on an NYPD detective.
No.
Assistant Commissioner Rebecca Weiner, based at a secret location in Lower Manhattan, says there's more plots than ever.
There's been 51 plots and attacks against the city in the last 20 years. Half of those, 25, have been in the last 5 years.
A rising number originating at home.
Other actors, like racially, ethnically motivated violent extremists, white supremacists, neo-Nazi, what we call accelerationists, and then anti-government extremism.
Keeping the country safe from any threat is a personal mission for Galati. Ground Zero is just a half-mile from his office. Names on the wall, people he knew. What is the thing that keeps you up at night on the dawn of this anniversary?
Well, I think that, I never feel easy, even if I do think that we have a good handle on the threat stream. It's the unknown that really frightens me.
Joe, for all of the programs and the NYPD Intelligence Bureau's successes, the programs have come under criticism in the past. In 2012, there was a lawsuit filed against the NYPD alleging spying on the city's Muslim community by the New York City Police Department. That lawsuit has since been settled. I asked Chief Galati about it. He says that in some of the early days of the Intelligence Bureau, there were some mistakes that were made, but he says he's on solid ground at this point as far as going forward and making sure the civil liberties of all of New Yorkers are protected. He also notes that the department has a significant amount in the Intelligence Bureau of Muslim officers and says they'd be the first to raise their hands if there were any concerns going forward about spying against that community. Joe.
All right. Tom, thanks for your reporting. Appreciate it. Just days before the anniversary of 9/11, the pre-trial hearing for the alleged mastermind of the terror attacks, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, is set to resume. 4 others linked to the attacks are also facing court proceedings today. NBC News national security correspondent Ken Delaney joins us now from the military court in Guantanamo Bay. So, Ken, first of all, remind us, who is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and what is the role he's accused of playing in 9/11?
Good morning, Joe. He's known as KSM for short, and by his own words, he said he was responsible for the 9/11 operation from A to Z. That was in a 2007 confession. And look, intelligence officials say 9/11 would not happen without KSM. He planned it, he conceived it, he pitched it to Osama bin Laden. The intelligence community did not know much about him until they learned of his role and then captured him in Pakistan in 2003. And then he was in CIA custody at a black site, and that's where things get sticky. He, we now know, was tortured was waterboarded, was walled, was struck, a lot of really nasty things were done to him. And then he was transferred to Guantanamo Bay and interviewed separately by the FBI. And he has confessed to all manner of terrorist attacks in addition to the 9/11 attacks. But now some of those confessions are under challenge by defense lawyers who say they were tainted by torture. And that is one of the issues in these endless pretrial hearings that are happening here at Guantanamo Bay and that resume in the courtroom today. Joe.
Yeah, you say endless pretrial hearings. So what can we expect from those hearings today?
So today there is a new judge in the case, Colonel Matthew McCall, and they're going to do a procedure known as voir dire of the judge, where the defense attorneys and the prosecution ask the judge questions about his background to determine whether he has any biases or any reason he shouldn't be hearing the case. It's an interesting procedure that doesn't happen in civilian courts. It happens in military courts. But it's an example of the kind of delays that we're seeing. This is like the fourth judge that has presided in the courtroom. There's been turnover of prosecutors and lawyers. It's a logistical nightmare to get here. There's secrecy that surrounds these proceedings. All of that adds up to the reason we're in the 9th year of pretrial hearings, Joe, with no trial date set and none in sight.
Yeah, I think folks watching right now may be scratching their heads as we come on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. This is one of, if not the longest prosecutions in U.S. history. So do you think, will we ever see a verdict, or has this use of torture on the suspect affected the chances of getting one?
I have to say, a lot of experts I spoke to in reporting this story do not believe we will ever see a trial here. They're looking at the pace of the pretrial hearings and saying it could go on another 10 years, just arguing over, for example, this issue of whether the confessions can come in after torture. And that's not the only issue at play here. There was at one time a plan to try these defendants in New York City. That failed amid political opposition, but there are still options to change this. They could be moved to a military base in the U.S., for example. There could be another attempt to try them in federal civilian court. But what most experts say is this process simply just isn't working, Joe.
All right. Ken Delaney reporting from Guantanamo Bay. Ken, thanks so much. Coming up, the latest legal battleground of the pandemic, religious exemptions to vaccine mandates.
Are the challenges legitimate or merely politically driven? We'll dig into the arguments next.
Millions of jobless Americans are confronting a new financial reality this morning as federal unemployment programs passed early in the pandemic were allowed to expire yesterday. So what does this mean for the families that relied on that income and for the economy as a whole? For more on that, we're joined by NBC News senior business reporter Ben Popkin. So, Ben, good morning to you. Walk us through these programs. What did they do, and how many Americans are going to be affected now?
Good morning, Joe. Starting today, an estimated 7.5 million will no longer receive any kind of federal pandemic assistance. There were 3 programs that ended. One, which gave benefits to gig workers and freelance workers who are usually ineligible for these benefits. Another gave an additional weeks of benefits after state benefits expired. And a third, which gave $300 per week in benefits. As of today, all have ended with no apparent appetite to extend them. It is the largest cutoff in jobless benefits in history.
So, Ben, during the summer, we know more than 24 states opted out of these federal programs early. The idea those states argued was that this would encourage unemployed people to seek out jobs. What did we learn from that? What is it that actually happened?
Well, what we learned is anyone who is banking on these benefits ending to send a rush of workers to fill the 10 million open positions should make other plans. Only 1 in 8 unemployed found a job after the benefits ended, one study found. And according to census surveys, the main reason people aren't taking these jobs isn't government money. It's childcare, fears of getting or spreading the virus, or having to take care of someone or themselves with COVID.
So a lot of those folks lost the benefits and also weren't able to get a job. Now, the federal government spent nearly $800 billion on unemployment aid during the pandemic. That's a lot of money. How will the abrupt end of those programs impact the economy?
Well, what we found is when benefits end, the immediate impact is not that workers go out and find a job. It's that they have to immediately cut back on spending, and it increases their risk of poverty. Up to now, large parts of our economy have been insulated during the pandemic due to these benefits. Unlike previous disruptions, people kept paying their bills. They kept shopping. They kept paying their credit cards, rent, mortgage. Now that's ending. Consumer consumption is the engine that drives our consumer-driven economy. Now we're going to be pumping less gas in it. So we're going to start seeing some slowdown in the coming months.
All right, Ben, thanks for your reporting. Appreciate it.
As more businesses and institutions adopt COVID vaccine mandates for their workers, a new legal battle is emerging.
It pits public health needs against the First Amendment and the right to refuse the shot on religious grounds.
Yeah, to help us break this down, we're joined by NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalas. Danny, good morning. So we've heard these reports of evangelical groups coaching their members on how to skirt these mandates. Now a suit has been filed on behalf of Maine healthcare workers, arguing the vaccine mandate violates their religious liberties. What are these groups saying?
They're essentially saying that the vaccine violates their sincerely held religious beliefs. And generally, these track two theories. One is under 1 Corinthians in the Bible, the notion that the body is a temple. Of course, the answer to that is, well, when was the last time you had another vaccine or a potato chip or a beer or a piece of beef jerky? If your body is a temple, then what exactly, how pure are the things that you're putting into it? The other position is that this violates sincerely held religious belief against using fetal tissue. And some of this fetal tissue dates back to 1985. But those are the two main tracks that the objectors, or the ones claiming religious exemptions to vaccines, are advancing.
So, Danny, what does the First Amendment protect, and how does that interact with public health measures like the vaccine mandate?
The First Amendment protections are so broad, they take up semesters of law school just on the protections contained in that one short amendment. However, we can whittle it down in this case to the notion of sincerely held religious beliefs. If a court ever reaches that issue, be warned that sincerely held religious beliefs can be very broad. They can be at odds with the main religion's tenets. But arguably, a court may never reach whether or not these folks sincerely believe that their religion prevents them from getting the shot, because the federal law prohibiting discrimination based on religious beliefs only requires a reasonable accommodation if it doesn't create an undue hardship on the employer. To use a silly example, imagine that my religion, I sincerely believe that working is a sin. Well, my employer is not required to accommodate that religious belief that I don't want to work. So there are limits even to sincerely held religious beliefs.
So, Danny, you mentioned that a court may never be able to really determine if this is this sincere religious objection to the vaccine. But what's the process for trying to do so? I mean, how do they try to establish if this is true or if somebody just simply doesn't want the shot?
Here's the mission, and this has been in some of the documents by Liberty Counsel that they have sent letters to employers. And the idea is this, that this is a reasonable accommodation. And because of that, we do reach the issue of sincerely held religious beliefs. And they even have an answer to my beef jerky argument, which is, look, just because this person has had vaccines in the past, just because they may have had a pepperoni pizza in the past, and your body is not a temple with a pepperoni pizza, unfortunately. That doesn't mean that the next day they can't wake up and start fresh and be born again and say, look, going forward, I will only take pure things into my body. Then, of course, that raises the factual issue of, well, what are they taking tomorrow? I mean, did they have a pizza tomorrow? Did they have a beer in 2 weeks? Did they smoke a cigarette? So that idea of starting fresh anew every day may not hold water either.
There's a lot of questions here about what's pure food.
Exactly. And if you had it yesterday.
Yeah. Pizza doesn't count, Danny? Are we sure?
I hope it does.
Yeah.
Well, there's healthy pizzas out there.
Yeah, salad pizza. All right, Danny, thank you so much. Always good to have you.
Coming up, it's called an invisible epidemic plaguing some American workers.
NBC News investigates the costly and controversial issue where some workers end up not getting paid at all after the break.
Imagine working and never getting paid. It's a practice called wage theft, and it's a growing problem, especially during rebuilding efforts after disasters.
Yeah, so last year, after a powerful storm ripped through Iowa, NBC News senior legal and investigative correspondent Cynthia McFadden began looking into the issue. Here's her report.
Last summer, in the midst of the pandemic, a historic storm lashed through Cedar Rapids, Iowa, leaving billions of dollars in damages across the state.
And you could tell how many buildings were damaged. Yeah, there was another building right there at the corner that got completely destroyed.
Pablo Ramirez hired a group of construction workers from Texas and Mexico to come help. Most of the workers did not speak English. He says he did not ask their immigration status. Ramirez hired the men as a labor broker for Blue Sky, a restoration construction company based in Colorado. Ramirez says he and the workers stayed here at one of the sites they were supposed to rehab. The conditions, deplorable.
They were not rentable. They were not rentable.
For over 3 weeks, the men say they worked without getting paid by Ramirez or Blue Sky, which had estimated revenues last year of $100 million. By the end of the month, they had run out of food. Royce Peterson is the head of the local carpenters union. In desperation, the workers turned to him for help.
We found out that these 6 workers hadn't eaten in 4 days.
Nothing?
Nothing. I said, go buy them some groceries. Let's get these guys fed.
Even though they weren't union members.
We're out there to fight for the workers against unscrupulous contractors. And no matter who you are, if you're union or not.
When Ramirez told Blue Sky the union was involved, he says they told him to fire the workers, who now had no food, no cash, and no place to live.
This is where the guys stayed. You welcomed the 6.
Yep. This is where they came.
Reverend John Grieve opened his church to the workers who slept among the pews that first night.
How long did it take for you to decide you were going to cook them a meal?
Less than 5 minutes.
You gave them the keys to the church?
Yes, I did.
Literally.
They weren't strangers, they were just people I didn't know.
They asked for full and immediate payment. Meanwhile, a picket line was set up outside the workers' job site. The demand?
Pay them their back wages and pay them for their travel expenses.
Facing mounting backlash, 2 Blue Sky executives flew in, agreeing to pay the workers after a day of negotiations, in exchange for non-disclosure agreements. Wage theft victims are usually low-wage workers, sometimes undocumented, who are often too intimidated to complain. Experts say some companies hide behind labor brokers, claiming they never promised the workers anything. In a statement to NBC News, Blue Sky says their labor broker was the problem. The issue in Cedar Rapids arose because Mr. Ramirez failed to pay the people he personally hired, despite Blue Sky having paid Mr. Ramirez for that same work.
Blue Sky says you're the one who messed this up. Yeah, they can say whatever they want, but they know the truth.
It's estimated over $15 billion is stolen from workers every year.
It truly is an invisible epidemic. Some of the wealthiest investors in the world are profiting from the work of some of the lowest paid workers.
Investors like Dominus Capital, a New York-based private equity firm, which is the majority owner of Blue Sky. Dominus did not respond to numerous requests for comment, and Blue Sky declined to be interviewed. But Pablo Ramirez, who says because of all of this he has lost his home, did agree to talk.
Do you feel guilty? Yes, I feel guilty for bringing my own people here to have them work and not get them paid.
When we contacted Blue Sky, they announced they'd be expanding their existing oversight program to ensure that partners paid workers fairly, accurately, and on time. Meanwhile, we've learned that city officials have Blue Sky under scrutiny in the city of Minneapolis.
And that does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.